please join me in prayer as we just seek God for today. Father God, we just thank you again for another chance to worship you, to celebrate all that you're doing in our lives. We continue to pray for all the missionaries that are out there in the world, God, especially for Alex Christie as they're pursuing a new direction. We continue to pray that you'll be able to really lead them well and allow them to keep using their gifts. We just pray for all our hearts that we're continuing to have that missional mindset, trying to find ways to reach people, continuing to want to share your love. And we just pray that this message today will really fill us with more love and more desire to just keep reminding people how beautiful your name is and more importantly, how beautiful your love is. And so we just pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, and most of you see there's 2 pages, right? And so we won't be reading them all, even though I'm kind of charged up after vacation. I won't have you read everything, but you'll see why there's 2 pages at the end of this sermon. So today we're going to be looking at Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. So it'll be on the screen, and it's on the handouts. You can read it with me. It says, "So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." And so as we read this, I kind of had this principle that we're going to focus on. And it says, humility is not just doing actions to help people in need. Humility is changing the way we think so we can be united and represent Christ well. A lot of times I feel like in church, when we talk about humility, it's all about how can I serve people? How can I do things for them? Right? How can I help those that are in need or starving or hungry? Right? So it's always this kind of service mindset. I need to give. And that's what we count as humility. I'm putting their needs above my own. But if you look at this section and how Paul is framing everything, he's talking about thoughts, your minds. Right? He's talking about if you think alike, you will be united. And in order to be able to think alike, you need to change your mindset in order for that to happen. Right? He's using all these words about your thoughts, your thinking. Not just necessarily just about actions, not just about doing service stuff for people. Does that make sense? You need to actually think differently and be humble in order for us to be united. He's talking about this church being united. All right? And so that's what I kind of titled this, Humility in How We Think and Then Act. Right? We can't serve people the right way. We can't do that is part of being humble, serving them, doing things for them. But if we're not having the right thoughts, then it's really not going to actually point them to Christ. It's really not going to represent the gospel well. Paul talks about this over and over. The less united you are, the less powerful the gospel is. Because people don't see the transforming spirit leading you guys together. Right? So even if you're serving people and telling them about Christ, but we're not united here, then the gospel loses its power. All of us know the gospel is the most powerful thing in our lives. It's transformed us. It's changed us. But we also need to know how the gospel transforms us to be more united. That's what Paul is writing about. That's what he's pleading for them. Change the way you think so that you can be united. And so that's where we're going to focus more on this, how to think differently, right? How to actually think with the humility that Christ wants us to have. And for the most part, the humility that Christ acted with himself as well. All right? And so obviously there's a lot of approaches to come at humility. Even as I was planning, I was like, there's a lot of different angles, even with stories and stuff. Just to start off, I was thinking about like how humble this church is. Right? And so I'm like, you guys are all right. You guys are pretty humble, right? But there's based on this, where it's like, do you really think about others' needs? Do you change the way you think to make sure other people are comfortable, right? That you meet their needs, or put their needs as more significant, all right? And I was like, my first experience with you guys, I don't think you're that humble, right? And the reason why, and it starts with tofu, right? When I first got here, everybody's like, what do I like to eat? Things like that. And I was like, I don't like tofu. I was like, I would be happy to never eat tofu for the rest of my life. That's what I said. That's on my heart, right? And I told people, I was like, I love meat so much. That's my top priority in life, eating meat. I don't like meat substitutes. I don't see any reason why I should ever eat tofu, right? And so as I share this with the church, I'm sharing you what is the top thing on my heart, right? My top desire, never to eat tofu. And so in a humble church, they would have been like, hey, this guy is coming from a whole nother culture. He's willing to sacrifice all these comforts, all these things. We should meet him halfway and not make him try to eat tofu. Right? That would be the humble thing to do. But that was not everybody's reaction, right? Everybody was like, oh, I have a dish that if he tried, he would like tofu. Right? He should try this, he should try that. Everybody had like, you should eat this kind of tofu, right? Nobody was like, let's find all these dishes that don't have tofu that we can share with them. We can still share our culture and meet him where he's at right now. Does that make sense? But that's not where everybody was at. Everybody's like, eat tofu now. And so, so I did my blood work, right? I have all my blood work is perfectly healthy. That's what shocks people. They're like, how can that be? And it's just, I have so much joy and I work out. I know how to work out and do all that stuff. But it's just funny, right? Like it's always about embracing culture. So I knew I needed to eat tofu because all of you wanted it, right? But it was just kind of funny. A person coming from an outside culture had to adjust, right? That's what you guys wanted. And so thankfully somebody here was like, because the thing with tofu is just the texture. I don't like any food that's really soggy, right? So it's like, part of it was I didn't know enough about tofu. The only things I ever saw was where it was really, really soft. And so, but at the same time, I just don't like meat substitutes, right? I want to eat meat. My stomach can only hold so much meat, and then I have a dessert stomach, right? So I was like, I can see tofu as a good dessert. Like based on the texture, it's kind of soft. Like, I can see that as a dessert. It's almost like creme brulee, things like that. So somebody was like, hey, they actually listened to what I was saying. I don't want meat for my dinner. I don't want tofu as a dinner, right? A dinner side. I want it maybe as a dessert. And so somebody was like, hey, there's actually a dessert tofu that you could try. Here, try this. That way it meets what you want, but it also allows you to bond with the group here. Does that make sense? You can meet them halfway. So I tried the tofu dessert, and it was good, right? It was really good. I was like, okay, there you go. It was a good start. And so Kevin, he used to take me around, and he showed me a lot of the foods, right? He introduced me slowly to these tofu. Because everybody else was like, start with stinky tofu, right? Like they all wanted to go to the most extreme. And so he gradually stepped me up because he knew my heart's desire was to always make sure I'm trying to put everybody else's needs above my own, right? If that's what's important to you, I want to find a way to learn to like it. Right? I want to be able to enjoy the meals that everybody likes. So he worked with me on that, right? Because he knows that's my heart. And so thankfully together we found a bunch of dishes that I like. So there's a lot of tofu. Margaret, I've been eating on my own. I found there's like tofu skin, dim sum stuff. Like I was like, there's so many. I was like, why didn't they start with this? I even served tofu on Friday, right? Some of the youth missed it, but I actually finally served some tofu for Friday. That's how I've come full circle, right? But this is where I say, like, it's a heart attitude. It's a mindset thinking. If this is what's important, I need to find a way. I know this is not what's comfortable for me, but if that's what all they care about, then I got to find a way, right? So if we're asking who's more humble on this side of the church versus this side of the church, I'm just kidding. All right, but I'm just trying to set it up, right? Just understanding this kind of concept, because this is what Paul is talking about. Do you think differently? Do you think in a way that allows people to actually, like, you put their thoughts more important than your own? Do you think they know better than you do, right? And because that's what it comes down to. A lot of these churches, Paul writes in all these letters, they have so many different arguments, all these leadership struggles, all these different things, right? And so Paul is kind of telling them, you'll complete my joy by these three things: being of the same mind, same love, same accord, and of one mind. You'll complete my joy by, number 2, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, which is excessive pride in oneself. And then count others more significant than yourself. So this is what I'm saying. If you see the words that he's using, get rid of pride, have the same love, same mind, and then think of others more significantly. It's not just about service actions, right? This is really about how you think about people, how you listen to people, how you share ideas with people, right? And so that's where hopefully we're going to try to establish it. He's talking about if you do these things, this will complete my joy. And so I have this definition of terms for you just to kind of help you understand what he's talking about, right? If there's any encouragement, in that very beginning verse, he talks about there's any encouragement, any comfort from love, participation. So he's telling them, I know you guys have great love. I know you have great comfort. I know you're participating in the Spirit. I know you have great affection and sympathy for each other. That's great. But you need to be united in mind. You need to be thinking the same thing. Right? Because most Christians, like, as long as we share great love, share good comfort, things like that, we're doing good as a church. But he's telling them that you're doing that already, but that's not enough. So that's where for us, we got to think, hey, yes, we share good love here. We're good at comforting. We're good at sharing sympathy and listening to people. But we're not good at being united. So then we got to keep plugging into this humility that we need to have to complete the joy of Paul was wanting us to have, but ultimately to complete the joy that Jesus wants us to have, right? Jesus will have joy if we're united. And so, because even for our church, right, I think most of you can agree, like, we're not very united with, there might be like English, Chinese differences, but at the same time, even our English congregation is not fully united, right? So it starts with us, right? How can we be united here and continue to build, and build? Because this is what's going to complete our joy. And so this is where he says, in verse 2, you are in agreement. If believers cannot live in unity, the transformative power of the gospel comes into question. As a result, the gospel message may lose credibility among believers. Paul will write this. These are the definitions out of these commentaries, right, where they're talking about, like, his full letter. This is what the idea he's going to present. It starts it in 2:2, and he's going to continue it and back it up in the rest of the letter. The gospel will lose credit if we aren't united. So the word united in spirit, the Greek word here, it describes sharing the same attitude or mindset, namely the mindset of Jesus Christ. This points back to the letter's main purpose of encouraging the Philippians to stand firm together. Right? In the very beginning, when he tells them, I'm going to tell you all these instructions so you can stand firm together. This is not a book for that you can stand firm by yourself. Right? Everything that he uses, every wordage, is all about standing firm together. He's like, the church needs each other. And so I like this part where it's like, if you are all trying to follow the Spirit, follow Christ, it should be very easy to then follow the same direction. Would you guys not agree? Right? If we're all following the same Spirit, we're all following the same Bible, it should be easy for us. We have the same source material. We have the same training manual. Right? But there's obviously reasons why that doesn't happen. And so that's where he'll talk about, but this is where we have to understand. We're trying to have the mindset of Christ. So it should be we should see it as very easy to kind of follow together because we're following one example. All right, the empty conceit. It refers to arrogance, pride, or inflated ego. We'll talk more about this later. But this is where Paul is kind of saying, why do we not have unity? Because most people are stuck in their arrogance, pride, or inflated ego. Their way of thinking, they're stuck in that pride, which is what prevents the unity. Right? So that's what he's talking about, and we'll get to that more later. But this is what we said. He's really trying to use all these words and images of what's in your mind. And then the last one, each of your own interests over others. This attitude is reflected throughout the chapter in the examples of Christ, Timothy, and Epaphroditus. Right? So Paul will back this up. We'll cover this in future weeks where he's going to tell them, look at the way they think, look at the way they act, look at the way they continue to treat other people. This is what you're trying to follow. This is what we need to do for our church to be for this church to be unified. All right, so that's the background. So we're going to go through these three the three levels, right, to completing the joy. This having the same mind, love, and direction. And so like I said, humility comes down to, is your way the best way? Is your way the only way of doing things? Are you the only one following God? Is your way the only way that's being led by the Spirit? All right, that's where we see that pride come in. So these are the things. Our way can't be the only way. Right? We cannot have all the answers. One person cannot know every single thing this church needs to do. Number two, our way isn't always the best way. So many times most churches get in fights and division because that's what they feel. Our way is the best way. If you don't do it this way, you're not following God. If you don't want to follow God, I don't want to be here, or you need to go. Does that make sense? If that's your mindset that only your way is the best way, then that's that pride, arrogance, inflated ego. You're the only one that can hear the Spirit. You're the only one that can give the direction. Does that make sense? If that's your mindset, then you're definitely not humble. Right? And then we're definitely not going to be united if everybody's thinking that way. So this is where Paul's trying to tell them, drop that stuff so that you can be united. We are not the only one trying to follow God's direction. We might feel that that's not a godly way of doing things. But guess what? Other cultures do it very differently than you. Right? All these different generations, everybody's going to see it differently. The church is a beautiful place because we have so much diverse ideas, backgrounds, experiences that we can see God more because of that. Because people have seen him do different things in different ways in different times. Right? It's a blessing to us to be able to see so much. The only negative is that we're never going to see the things alike. But that's okay. How can we then combine our experiences to then see what is the direction going forward? That's why God brings us together. You by yourself can't see it all. You by yourself have history that prevents you from seeing this. You've seen only this way being done. There's so many other ways being done. Combine it and be humble and not know your way is not the only way, and your church will be united. And you'll find a deeper way of following me. And you'll be able to add more people because you're comfortable adding different views. Right? So that's what Paul's trying to tell them. You're not the only one following God's direction. We have to find a way to make it a win-win for everyone. This is where we see, if you read all of the New Testament, it's all about solving church division. Almost every letter is about church division. The only one that's not is probably Peter, because he's talking to people that are exiled because the Roman Empire kicked them out. But as they're exiles, they're supposed to act a certain way, And then when they come back, that's where Romans comes into play. It's like, now you guys have come back. Now you got a lot of issues because you don't know how to get along with the Gentile Christians that have grown since you left. Right? But every letter circles around this divisions because this is what it's about. We're bringing in more people, more cultures. Right? We know we're going to have these battles, but we know we need God to lead the way. If you read Acts, Paul, when he's first going to the Gentiles, right, he gets called to what they call the Jerusalem Council. All the apostles, all the main leaders, right? All the main Jewish leaders, Jewish Christian leaders. Hey, we're doing this to the Gentiles. We're not making them have to do this. We're not making them have to eat these foods, right? We're trying to meet them halfway. And so that's where Paul is like, I believe this is what God's calling me to do, to share the gospel to the Gentiles. This is in Acts 15, right? So it'll be on the second page, so you can read it later to confirm this. But in that session, in that Jerusalem council, Paul is speaking, and a lot of the Christians are like, man, this is wrong. He's changing rules that he shouldn't change just to meet these people. And there's a man that steps up. His name is James. It's not James, the 12 apostles. This is James, Jesus' half-brother. He is actually the leader of the church at that time. And he gives a speech right there. If this is not from God, it will not be productive. We don't need to stop it. God will not bless it. So we should not, just because it's different from us, just because it's not the rules that we followed all our lives, if this is what's happening, if we see the Spirit filling these people, then we are not the ones to stop it. We have to trust God, and we got to trust them that they're listening to God and let them do what they see is right. And so they're like, just make sure that you preach these two major things because this is what's important for every believer. And Paul's like, absolutely. And it was taking care of those in need, right? That was one of the major ones. He's like, that's what we were going to preach anyways. Absolutely, we'll do it. Right? But you can see you see this win-win as they're trying to follow God. We need to make it easier for this group to understand and come to Christ. But at the same time, we can't just ignore the other group and just completely ignore all the old ways. Right? And so there's this, they show you the balance, but also this mindset of seeking God and seeking what's best for everybody. Because if you give one group complete freedom, then the other group's going to suffer, right? Like, why do we have to do all this stuff? So you're trying to be sensitive of both sides, saying both sides are significant. Both sides need to win. Both sides need to get closer to God by the decision that we make. All right? So that's where Paul, he's living this out. We have all the other books to go with this section. But that's what we have to understand, right? We have to find a way to make it win-win for everybody. And then the last one, to have the same mind, love, and direction, God has the final answer on how to move forward. At the end of the day, whether we agree or not, we can still bless each other, support each other, because we believe God is the one that holds it all together. Right? He's the one that moves everybody forward. Because even Paul in his own life, you'll see this after in the second page as well. After he goes to Jerusalem Council, Paul and Barnabas are going to be sent on their second missionary journey. Paul does not want to take John Mark, and Barnabas does. And so they end up getting in an argument, and they both can agree that they should take him or leave him. So they end up splitting. Paul goes with Silas, right? He takes off and does his own ministry. Barnabas takes Mark, and they do their own ministry. Does that make sense? And both of them are blessed by God because they went in the proper directions. Does that make sense? Neither one of them did not follow God. It was just time for them to separate. Does that make sense? So that's where we see, like, no matter what. And then that's where we see later, Paul's like, man, John Mark, bring him to me. He's such a great comfort to me. We see that when they believed that God was leading both sides, they could always be united and still be there for each other. Barnabas and Paul will still be there for each other. Does that make sense? They were able to understand God must be leading us apart. And it was true. Barnabas was developing Paul for all those years they were doing ministry together. Now Barnabas had a chance to develop leaders himself. He would develop Silas and then Timothy. Does that make sense? Mark, he would end up being with Barnabas, who would then hang out with Peter. And Mark would actually chronicle all of Peter's life. That's how we have the first gospel of Mark. The very first gospel written was by John Mark. And he basically was listening to Peter and wrote down every single story that he had. Mark is not one of the 12 apostles. That book is not from a 12 apostle, but it's written by somebody that recorded every single thing. And that was the earliest book that the Christians needed, and he was the one that wrote it. If he's with Paul, he's not out there writing that book. Does that make sense? Christians will be divided because they don't have a unified book to go off of. And so this is where we can see, even through this history, even with the separation, it was always under God's plan, always under God's direction. So you can still be unified even if you don't see eye to eye, because your one same direction is we're trying to preach the gospel. We're trying to reach the lost. we're trying to do missional work. If that's together or separate, let's still do it together. Right? But that's where it's at. Like, if you're like, this person didn't listen to God, I can't support them, I can't help them if they want to do differently. Yeah, there's no unity. And then you start tearing each other apart. And then your own, people are like, whoa, it just tears up your own community where you don't even support people that think differently. Right? So this is where it's important. The same mind, same love, same direction. And so the reason why this is hard, and is that second point on letter B, pride is the enemy of humility. The reason why we can't be humble the way we need to be is because we're usually stuck with pride. There's a pride about us that stops us from ever being humble enough to be unified. All right, and so this is where, you have to understand, right, that arrogance, pride, inflated ego. So these are some of the signs that you have pride. We must acknowledge, and so if you can never be wrong, then you have to believe that you have pride. Right? How can you have the answer 100% of the time? How can you be right 100% of the time? Nobody's right 100% of the time. Only Jesus is right 100% of the time. So if you go into every conflict with church people and you're like, I'm right every single time, maybe that's a sign that you're stuck in pride. Does that make sense? If you're right 100% of the time, you should be up here speaking, not me. I should be sitting down. But even as I'm speaking up here, I'm not 100% right all the time. I know that. I come up here telling you I don't know all the answers. Right? Because I can't be right 100% of the time. All the history, all the experiences, those change me. Right? Even my own pride will fight me from seeing certain things. Right? So that's where we have to understand. We cannot be right every single time. And so if we know we can't be right every single time, it'll make it easier for us to listen to different ideas. It'll make it easier for us to listen to people that have a different type of philosophy. If they could be right, I could be wrong. Let me listen before I make up my mind. So that's where we must acknowledge someone may know better than us, no matter how much experience we have. This is where the Bible's kind of cool, where it's like, it doesn't talk about age in a positive, right? Because there's a lot, usually it talks about maturity as a positive. If you grow in spiritual maturity, you'll be better off. If you grow in spiritual maturity, you'll know what to do. If you grow in spiritual maturity, you will not fall off, right? But just because you get old doesn't mean you're actually maturing. Usually there's actually a warning to all the older people where it's like you get so stuck in your ways thinking you can never be wrong, you miss everything. You ignore everybody's other ideas. You ignore all these things. So your age actually becomes a hindrance because you're not humble. You're stuck with pride, and pride and old age create create something very bad. Right? But if you're old and understand that you can be wrong and you're always listening and always maturing, then this is not an issue for you. You will be growing older and more mature. Does that make sense? And so this is where Paul is trying to tell him. Like, Timothy, as he gives him the letter, right, to lead, that's what he tells him. Timothy, you're going to take over the church at Ephesus. You're going to be picking the deacons, the elders, all the leaders. You're going to be establishing the culture there. Don't let anybody think because you're young that you don't know what you're talking about. He literally puts somebody in charge, the youngest guy in charge, to lead that church and get them right. And Paul's literally telling those older people at Ephesus, you might think you know more than this guy, but everything you've been doing has caused all kinds of division, all kinds of problems. Your churches have had so much issues. You don't know what you're doing. Your actions show that. Let me bring in this guy whose actions you've seen and heard about and see how good and humble he is, and he will be the one that leads you together. He puts everybody's interest first. He cares about people so much. You never have to question his motives, that he's not seeking God. You'll never question that he's acting in humility versus pride. Because in the rest of this chapter, he'll talk about Timothy, how good he is. And that's what he uses for this church, and he uses them for when he takes over Ephesus. Listen to this young man who's matured in the right ways and is willing to listen to everybody and bring them all together to seek the direction of God, not just him doing his way. Right? So that's where we have to understand, right? There's usually a warning more for the age that we get stuck in our ways. But this is where we have to always understand and acknowledge somebody may know better than us, no matter who they are, what age they are. We also must acknowledge that we do not have the strength to do everything alone. We must be willing to get help. We must be willing to share our struggles. So I'm saying these three all together because for the most part, we've been talking a little bit about like for Chinese church, right? Chinese culture. How many of you ever ask for help? How many of you ever share what you're going through, all your struggles, what you're not good at? Right? For the most part, especially, it's not just Chinese culture, but Christians in general, we love to want to help people. We love to want to serve them. We love to want to meet them where they need something. It makes us feel better. Right? It gives us a high. But in many ways, it creates kind of like that savior complex. I'm all about helping others. But we're never like, I need help. When it comes time to it, when you actually need it, you don't ever bring it up to nobody. You don't ever share with nobody. Right? How is that not prideful? If you're willing to help everybody else and say, oh, I know they need help, but I won't take help. I won't share what I go through. That doesn't bring unity. Does that make sense? You're stuck. I just can give. I don't need. Right? I always laugh at churches because they always love to put people that are very confident down. And the way they put confident Christians down is, everybody's born with the weakness. Everybody struggles with sin. Everybody has this. Everybody can't do this by themselves. Everybody needs somebody else. You should not be this confident. And they push those people down. But then the people that are pushing that person down, when you ask, okay, what's your struggle? What's your weakness? What's your sin? I don't have none. Or I won't share it. Does that make sense, right? If you're telling somebody that everybody struggles with sin, then you literally just pointed to yourself saying, I got a sin that I'm dealing with. There is something I need help with. Because I'm saying everybody needs it. But then if you don't share it, what are you really telling that person? I don't have that problem. I don't need help. I'm just here to help you. And if that's your stance, then nobody's going to ever share with you. Nobody's going to open up. Nobody's going to want to connect with you. Because you're putting up a wall of pride that will never acknowledge that you have weakness. Right? And that's what we see. Pride is the enemy of humility. Pride is the enemy of unity. And so for all of us, we're not comfortable sharing. I get that. But guess what? We have to. We have to share what we go through, what we struggle with, what God is helping with us, in order for that to create a culture that others will then feel comfortable. Right? Paul sets this perfect example all the time. He shares everything that he struggled with. He shares when he felt like he was in death. Right? He shares all these type of ways that he struggled. He shares that he was the worst enemy. He shares all these things. He's willing to talk about all his weaknesses so that he can show them, right, that God's the one that did it for him. God's the one that helped him. And God helped him either directly or through the church, all the people that are there to support him. Right? Paul says, he says literally, I boast in my weakness so that God can get the glory. He's boasting about his weaknesses. We won't even share a weakness. Does that make sense? We won't share one weakness that we go through. How could we then be unified? How could we ever get closer if we never want to share anything? It's not just about helping somebody. Right? That's what Paul's saying. You just want to help because you don't want to actually admit. You don't want to share your struggle. Right? A lot of times, especially with Christians, we talk, like people are like, prayer is so important, prayer is so important. We got to pray all the time. We got to bathe everything in prayer. And then, a year go by, they're like, man, that person was out for like a year. And then all of a sudden they tell you, oh yeah, God just finally delivered me. God answered this prayer for me. Right? And he did this and this miracle. And it's cool to hear about the miracle, but then in many ways you're like, how come you didn't share that for this whole year? Why didn't you ask us to pray for you? Why didn't you talk about what you were going through? Why did it only have to be you praying for it by yourself? Why did you not lean on us? We could have grown closer together because of this. Right? If you believe in prayer, if we all prayed for it, it may have been solved in 6 months. Could have been done in 3 months. Who knows? Right? But we know what we're supposed to do. It tells you, share your burdens with each other, pray with each other, all these things. These are all the instructions, commands that are there. But yet we hide everything. We hold it back. How will that ever bring us unity? How will that ever bring us closer? And it starts with each individual, right? You have to be willing to share it. You have to be willing to get help. The last one, right? Pride versus humility. Not speaking up shows you don't believe someone can change and do right. Only you do that. So even as we talk about this unity where you're like, hey, a lot of us feel this is wrong, but you don't want to speak up. And then it's kind of like, what does that really say about if you don't want to speak up about the person that you're supposed to speak up to? They won't listen. They won't change. They're stuck in their ways. And that usually builds frustration, right? Oh man, I can't believe this person doesn't change. I can't believe this person doesn't listen. If somebody came to me, I would change. If all these people told me I was wrong, I would listen, right? You're like, why can't they be more like me? You see how that pride slips in? See how that inflated ego slips in? So now you're not united with this person because you're not willing to share and give them a chance to change. You're not willing to share and see a different point of view. Oh, you might see that way, but I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. Does that make sense? And that's where that humility comes in. I need to be able to listen also to their point of view, their history, what's going on. But if I'm already making a decision, they ain't going to listen, then yeah, you're never going to have unity. But it's not their fault. It's your fault. Because you had too much pride to ever talk with them. Listen, talk and listen. Does that make sense? That's what Paul's saying. The pride will stop that humility. If you're united in mind, you know that they want the same direction. They want to follow Christ. They want people to get Christ. Then yes, you'll have different opinions, but you need to work it out. If you're led by the same love, led by Jesus, you got to speak up. And so that's why this culture, right? That's all these things is part of that culture. We don't speak up. We don't make it public. We don't do all these different things. And I get that. But guess what? Like I've said, once you became a Christian, you left your old life behind. You left your old culture behind. And now you became Christ's. You became his. You became united with him. You get the Spirit to be united with him. Then that Spirit leads you to be united with everybody else that's doing the same thing. We have to leave our old way behind and live this new way. It's going to be difficult, which is why then you have to keep leaning on Christ, keep leaning on the Spirit, all these different things. But you have to change the way you think of this is what I've always done or this is what I was taught. And I want to follow Jesus. The reason why I followed him is because the way I used to live, the way I was taught to live was not the right way of living. So we wanted to leave that way behind. That's the whole reason why we came to Christ. That's why Paul's like, it's okay that we're not united with non-believers because they haven't made this choice to live this way. As believers, we've all made this choice to live this way. So we should be pushing towards this way. And so, but what's going to stop us is our pride. That's what will stop us from being united and even having more deeper love. And so I'll end with this last one, to count others more significant than yourself. This really comes down to leaning on others to help you grow. Right? If you're a person that knows you need help, but don't ever ask for anybody's help or insights or ideas, you're literally telling them that you're not good enough to give me an idea that's better than my own. So I'm just going to stick with my own idea. Right? Is that fair to say? Is that fair to assume? Right? I was talking to Allison one time where we were like, it's important to get a lot of viewpoints. She was like, it's important to get a lot of viewpoints from people. Right? Before you make a decision about a topic you don't know, get all the viewpoints you can. If that way it gives you a better chance to make a good choice. And I was like, okay, I guess that's common wisdom, but I don't do that. I go to one person that I believe is good, and I listen to them, and I follow their advice. If you are not an expert on a topic, right, and you go to 6 experts and ask their opinions, how are you qualified to see which expert opinion is the best? Right? You don't know. You're not an expert. So basically, even though you did a great job of being humble by asking all these people, you still put it into your hands, your mind, that I'm the one that's going to pick the best idea. Right? Is that not one way of looking at it? How can you make a decision based on all the experts whose is the best expert? If you didn't know anything about that topic. So that's why most of the time I usually ask very specific people that are very gifted in the area. I ask them, I work with them, and I follow it and see how it turned out. Then I can get feedback with them, and then maybe I might add another expert or two. But if I'm not an expert in the area, how can I ever decide between all the people's ideas? I don't know that. Does that make sense? So how can I count others more significant than myself? By not making the decision over their advice. I take their advice, I follow it, and see how it works. Right? And so it seems simple, or it may, but that's what we're talking about as a Christian church. Hey, this person has a different idea. Well, I know this expert or this other person says otherwise. And so you can always find experts to back up your way of thinking. Right? And then it'll help you ignore that other person's idea. And then that person's going to get their experts, and then you're going to clash, and nobody goes anywhere. Right? Because you think your way is better than theirs. And you're going to find ways to back up your way of thinking. And so that's what we're talking about. How can we be united if we think our ideas will always be better? We have to be able to grow. We have to be able to ask for help, all these different things. Right? So that's why if you never ask for help, you're saying that you're better than everybody else around you. When you don't want to follow other people's ideas, you're saying you don't need to learn anymore because you know all the answers. Now, I'm simplifying it, right? Obviously, I'm not telling you to have to be robots and follow everybody. But there should be a tension where, like, hey, if I'm just always following my ideas, never listening to anybody, This ain't my church. I'm not a church of one. Does that make sense? We're a church of all. We're a church of everybody, so it can never be that way. Right? So how can I listen? How can I follow others' ideas? That's how you count them more significant. It's not just about sharing your goods with them. It's about listening to their ideas and following it. All right? And so this is where it comes down to the next one on the back page. When you turn down help, you are saying someone else's strength is not good enough for you. A lot of us, when we offer help to people, right? Some people will turn us down. We keep going. No, I need that. I know they need help. I'm going to keep going. I'm a good person. I'm going to keep trying to help them. Right? So we don't take no for an answer. Are a lot of you like that? Right? If you know somebody needs help, you're going to keep pushing to help them. Right? But how come we don't ever take the help ourselves? When somebody offers to help you, you're like, nah, I'm okay. I'm good. Right? If it brings you joy to serve somebody, if it brings you joy to use your gifts to help somebody, why would you deny somebody that same opportunity to help you back? Because it's usually pride. Why do they think I need help? Why do they think I'm weak? Why do they think I can't do this by myself? Right? Pride stops you from allowing you to get help. You see this a lot in the missionary, when people do missionary trips, right? People talk about this. You get a savior complex. You go to this third world country. Oh, man, our lives are way better than theirs. We need to give them all these things. We need to do all this for them. Give. Right? Their life is so bad. Their life is so sad. And these missionaries come in for a week, come in, share all this love. And the people in that area will be like, man, thank you for this. Can we cook you a meal to thank you? No, we're good. You save that money. You need it more than me. Think about what would that do to that group? They try to honor you, right? They try to you took away their honor, you took away their dignity. Because you thought they needed something. You thought they needed it more than you. That's that pride coming in again. Why can I not be served back? Why do I not need this encouragement? If you did a mission trip for a whole week, you're probably exhausted and tired, right? So yes, it would be nice to get a nice meal where you ain't got to do nothing. And also the joy of seeing them serve you, right? It feels good. It feels good to be loved like that. So it would help actually recharge you when you get back to want to continue missions. Find new ways. Right? This is where we see there's so many people, churches that do mission trips that they do that week and they come back and they got nothing afterwards. Because everybody's too tired or they're burned out, right? All these things. And so they don't do continual mission work. This is why I'm very impressed by Shirley and William, right? They did the Nepal trip. They still keep finding ways to try to reach out to them, connect with them, right? How can we serve them? What do they need? All these different ways, right? They brought back jewelry to serve the first time. They've been trying to connect them on Zoom, right? It's difficult because their schedule is hard. But they keep trying. They keep knocking down the doors. They did a bake sale, right? It was like a couple weeks ago, right? She was willing to bake. I didn't get the lemon bar. I only got to eat a brownie. The lemon bars are too popular, right? I had to make that sacrifice. I didn't want to eat them all. There's a rule of baking: don't get a sugar high on your own supply. All right, so I couldn't eat it, and then we didn't have nothing to sell, right? So hopefully we do it again, right? Hopefully we can do it again where we keep raising it. But this is where we see, right? Like the missional mindset, continuing to give and take. How can they serve us? How can we learn from them, right? It's not just us poor, right? They're trying to set up these conversations where they can keep talking to us, share their faith, share their experiences, right? It's meant to be mutual. And so this is where we see, if our mindset's always, I got to give help, I can't take it, we're not creating a more unified group. We're allowing our own pride to stop us. I know I'm guilty of this. Right? It's hard for me to take help. I won't deny that. Right? And so I like to spare people from having to lose stuff, right? That's my desire. But I've had to change that as a minister, as a pastor. I need to let people help me. I need to let them enjoy doing what I do. Right? I remember the first time I did the lights, the original one, not as good as Irene's this time. But when I first did it, Kevin had to pick up something. Somebody left some food for him. So I was about halfway through, and he was like, oh, man, you need some help? Right? And I knew he just came to pick up food. He didn't know I was doing this. He didn't want to, Kevin Yee, not Kevin, I don't give credit to Kevin Gao. But yeah, Kevin Yee, right? He came in, he was just picking up some food. He's like, oh man, Joaquin, I see you're up here working. Do you want some help? And originally I'm like, oh man, he's got a whole schedule, right? He had his day planned out. He didn't plan on serving. But when he offered, I was like, but I can't tell him no. Does that make sense? I was like, he wants to help. Well, what would it say if I say no? So I'm like, come on, man, go ahead. So we ended up doing it for an hour, right? And we had a great time. We were bonding, talking, man. It was just great unity. We got closer because of it. Just because I said yes to the help. Does that make sense? That's where it was like, I could have just put that block and be like, no, I know I can do this. I know I don't need help. But, so this is where we have to understand, why do we turn down help? Because I was debating whether to use this or not, but the whole Chinese culture of paying bills, the bill after the dinner. You guys know what I'm talking about? You pay, I'm going to pay, right? Everybody, they do that. There should be no fighting over the bill at a Christian table. The first person that offers it, you take it. Right? Because what's your motivation of you paying? Oh, I have more. No, you don't need this. You need it for something else. Does that make sense? Right? Why do we do that dance? That's not how, if somebody wants to pay for it, give them that honor. Be willing to accept the help. I'm available for lunch. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to test you guys. See if you do. I'm just kidding. There's actually this cool Jewish parable, right? It's this website. It's called Hebrew for Christians. And so there's this guy. It's actually like all these Jewish Christians that kind of try to help you see a lot of the Jewish faith that pours in, gives you deeper insights into our faith, right? Because that's where we come from. And so they do a great job of showing these parables and stories. There's a parable of these two brothers that live together, right? And so they have this big wheat farm. So one of them is single, and the other one is married with 2 kids, right? So every night, the guy that's single, he's like, man, my brother has so many mouths to feed. I have so much, my fields are doing so well, and he's got so many expenses, I should take some of my wheat and put it on his side. That way he can make more money to support his family, right? I want to put him first. So as he does that, the other brother who's married with 2 kids, he's like, man, my brother is so lonely. He's by himself. He doesn't have what I have. I want to give him up some wheat. That way he can have more money and be able to live his life better, right? Have more things in his life to fill it. And so he puts more wheat on that side. So every night for a week, they wake up every night. They're like, why did our wheat never change? Why is it always the same? And so that's when they realize. They come together and it's like, what's going on? He's like, well, I've been doing it at night, putting wheat on your side. I've been doing the same thing, right? And that's when they embrace, like, oh, they start crying, right? You know that good cry. And so this is where it was like, they're crying because they're like, man, we love each other. We're helping each other all the time. They thought they needed it, and so that's what they try to do, right? But both of them are trying to do it. There's this beautiful way of this community of giving help, taking help. Does that make sense? That's what Paul is trying to share, trying to build in them. You're not always going to be strong. You're going to need help. How are you going to build that in? How are you going to build a community that will let people want to come to get help? And it comes from us changing our mindset of this humility of I can always get help. Because it kind of ties back to Jesus. You look at his life, right? He says, I came to serve, not be served. But he allows himself to be served on a couple of occasions. When it's time to be him to be baptized, John the Baptist is like, I'm not worthy enough to baptize you. And he's like, but that's what God made you to do. You need to do this. We need to fulfill this. You baptize me. Right? He allows to be served. There's a woman that washes Jesus' feet. We know that we love to hear the story of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, but there's actually a better foot washing story than Jesus's. And it's this woman that does it. When she goes to wash Jesus' feet with this oil to anoint it, the apostles object. You're wasting good oil. That's expensive oil. We could use that and sell it to help the poor, do all these other good things. And Jesus is like, no, let her do what she wants to do. Let her serve me. You're only going to have me for a little while. Let her honor me this way. And it tells you not only does she's washing his feet, but she uses her hair to dry, like to rub it in his feet. Is that right? She uses it. That's why I was like, this is more. Jesus was using towels and washing them in water. This lady used her hair on his feet. Like, right? That's why I keep my hair shaved. I'm like, God could never ask me to do that. I'm just kidding. But that's what we see. Jesus' example, the strongest person, the greatest Savior, all these things. And he's willing to get the help to be served. Because he knows it honors them. It allows them to participate in God's great story. It allows them to experience grace like never before by doing this. Right? So if you know serving makes you feel good, why would you ever say no to anybody? Only pride would make you say no. Love will make you say yes. So act in love and share it, take it, right? So, and real quick, just to close. So there's these multiple pages, right? So this is your first true test of humility. Will you read all 4 of these pages tonight? to get a better idea of what it means to be humble? Or will you be like, I'm too tired, I'm too busy, I have other things I want to do? Right? This is the test. Will you, if you know you haven't been humble the way you need to be, will you put in the work to get more humble? Because I always laugh. Christians have probably heard the humility message 30, 40, 60, 100 times, right? And yet we still struggle to be humble because we never put it into practice. We wait and wait and wait. And so here's your first chance. Act humble tonight. Start that track record of I'm going to do what's necessary. I'm going to put others in. I'm going to be better at serving others because I read this. All right? And the reason why it's good is because I put some Bible examples, Jesus examples, and I have this other stuff. The Bible characters that are there, you have the Good Samaritan. You have Rahab, Ananias, who heals Paul, James, the brother of Jesus, Barnabas. When you read these stories, you'll realize that in their life, God set up these opportunities for them to choose humility or pride. Right? They didn't have to go seek out to be humble. They didn't have to go all this way. I need to find ways to serve people. God put it at their doorstep. God put it at their feet. Here's a chance. What are you going to do? Right? So that's why for most of us, we don't need to go look for opportunities to be humble. They're always there in front of us. We just need to make the right choice. So read these stories. Then there's the section Jesus, right? All the ways he sought to do what was best for the Father and what to do for people. You'll see his example of how he was trying to do these things for people. I don't want to go too much into Jesus because next week that's what it's all about, right? His ultimate example. But look at these, read these stories, look at these characters. And then I put this good article for you guys on the next page. So it says 5 potentially inconvenient steps to serving others well. So for me, as I'm preparing this sermon, right, I don't just go off of my mind what's good to be humble. I do extra research. I listen to other experts, all this other stuff. I found great art. This is from a group called Exploring Missions, right? So it's this missions group trying to be able to serve people all throughout the world. But this is how they're trying to get their people ready. This is why I'm saying the humility of like, I can't give you the best ideas. I can't give you all the ways because I don't know every way. So here's another person that said it better, right? And I gave him credit. But it talks about change your position. Make sure you have that servant heart. Number 2, take time to listen. Number 3, care even when it costs you something. 4, recognize you might not be the whole solution. This is where we see, like as Christians, sometimes we feel like it's so hard to help people. I got to do all this. I got to do all that. That's not what God asks. He just asks you to do your part. Trust the full community. Trust everybody. If you're listening to somebody and they're telling you all these problems that you can't handle by yourself, be willing to ask other people for help to help this person. Does that make sense? Somehow we think we're the only person that can help this person. More pride, right? You don't want to ask for help to help somebody because that shows you're not good enough to help that person. It's not true. That wasn't what God asked you to do. Does that make sense? So you got to change that way of thinking. You got to understand it's all under God's hand. Recognize you might not be the whole solution. It says to serve others well, we need to have faith that we are ultimately serving someone greater. And then the last one, allow yourself to be served. So I got a lot of this from the article too, right? Everybody talks about it. You got to let yourself be served. And so the article is there for you to read. The link, if you want just a little, I pretty much put the whole thing there. All right, so the applications for you to close. Read the entire 4 pages to help you grow in your ability to be humbler. Pray to God afterwards for helping and trying to be humbler. Number 2, ask loved ones, trusted friends, mentors, how well you listen to other people. If they think you need to get better and be humbler, listen to them and work on it. Right? This is where it's funny. You can be like, I'm good. I don't need this. Or I listen well. Ask everybody else if you listen well. And if they tell you no, count them more significant. Their observations are more significant than yours and follow it. Work on how you listen. Number 3, rate how much unity you feel here at the church from 1 to 10 for your personal group, the English ministry, and the whole congregation. Come up with a personal action that you can do to help bring more unity to the group. It's not about what somebody else can do, right? What they need to change, all this other stuff. What can you do for every group you're a part of to start helping bring more unity? Own up to that, right? And then number 4, commit to always doing whatever is necessary to get out of your comfort zone when the opportunities come up to help others do the same in the future, right? And so I was just talking about small groups, how you need to share, right? But I'll end real quick with just even this understanding that Paul's saying. If you live with this humility, there's a joy that comes from it. Right? This is not meant to put people down or make you feel like I'm not doing what's necessary. It's meant to show you if you do these things, you'll get a greater joy than you've ever experienced. You'll get a greater love than you've ever experienced. Right? You'll have all these great things that come from it. That's why this whole letter is about why he's so positive even through hardship. Because he knows that they're growing in this unity. He knows they're growing in this way of thinking that's allowing them to be more and more like Christ, which is the ultimate reward. Right? So even for myself, like this is how I try to follow, how I try to lead. this humble of listening to others, all that stuff, right? I get a lot of credit because the youth group runs really well. But it's when I started, had Danielle to help give me a lot of insight, right? How they ran it, all these things. So we talked through all these different ideas. I had Kevin, Angela, Frank, all these people giving me what was good to do, right? Hey, try this, try that, reach this way, right? I've been doing ministry for 7 years. I told you guys I led hundreds of people, led $1 million projects my whole life, right? I'm a leader of leaders. I've trained churches how to do children's and youth ministry before I got here. Yet I still would listen to every single leader and follow their ideas. Why? Because that's what it tells you. And we were blessed because of it. They knew more about the youth. They knew their experiences, right? They've walked in their shoes. Why would I come with the attitude that I know better? Or my idea is the only thing that we need to follow? Yes, I've been successful, but guess what? I'm successful because I've always listened. Does that make sense? So I wasn't going to plan on changing that. And so the leaders deserve way more credit than I do, right? Even when Kevin switched to the worship team, right? He had a great feedback of like every time we did our lesson prep, he's like, man, sometimes we're getting too much Bible knowledge. We're not hitting the personal topic for them enough. Let's do this. Let's do that, right? And so we would change. We would adjust. We would find ways to keep adjusting all the input. Does that make sense? That's what it meant to be humble and lead humbly, right? Even when we did the youth retreat, the high school retreat, I've led a lot of activities for the first 2 years here, right? Most of them are all pretty good. All of them went as very successful. But I still asked for opinions. I still asked for ideas, right? I was like, I can make this great, but if I listen to more people that have more experience, they can take it to a whole nother level and make it truly special. And it was. And because everybody truly enjoyed it, that's what brought me joy. This event went better than I could have ever imagined, better than I could have ever planned myself. Thank you, God, for allowing me to always listen, and thank you for putting around the people around me that could make this that much better, that are willing to speak up, share, right, come out of their comfort zones and be willing to help and give up their time. Does that make sense? Even for youth group, right? I make everybody answer every question every week. Been doing it for years. And at first, they're always uncomfortable with it, but it never stops. I will never relent in asking questions because I know their input, their ideas can help the group and help shape the direction we go forward and help shape me as a leader and shape me as a Christian. Does that make sense? So I know it's a lot. I ask a lot of them, but thanks to their advice, I can walk away every Friday as a better person because they shared what was going on in their minds. Right? So I know it's not, they come out of their comfort zone, they're willing to do that, and that helps me. And it makes my life, I have a true joy doing all these things. Right? So even when you go to small groups right after this, after the walk, right? I know it's uncomfortable to share. But if you're uncomfortable to share, then everybody else will be uncomfortable and nobody will share. Be willing to be the one that's, I'm going to put somebody else first. I'll speak up that way they can feel comfortable to speak. I can share something that I struggle with so somebody else can. I'll share something that God has done, right? Take that extra step. It starts in every little choice that you make. Can I put somebody else more significant? Can I step out of my own comfort zone? Just to help them, to help us all grow closer to Christ. And that's the true level of humility. I will do whatever it takes for people to have Christ. And that's what next week we'll set up very well. Jesus will empty himself. We'll talk about that. He emptied himself of everything to ensure everybody could have God. And we're supposed to be trying to do the same. And so I encourage you to, as not just a challenge of negative, but a challenge to lift you up. Think this way to have the joy that Paul wanted you to have, or he wanted his people to have, but have the joy that Jesus wanted you to have. All right, so please join me as we close in prayer.